Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Alliance Bernstein. Since 2019, employees have impacted our community by giving more than 5,000 hours of volunteerism in Middle Tennessee. AllianceBernstein.com. Alliance Bernstein is not affiliated with National Public Radio.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. When someone has a legal case to bring against the Metro Nashville Police Department, the maximum payout they can receive is $300,000. That cap comes from the city. Recently, litigation against MNPD has picked up both from civilians and from former officers of the department. So what's the history with these payouts? Today, we'll learn more about them. And to begin, we'll learn more about a former Metro Nashville police officer who was awarded hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages for being sexually harassed by her fellow officers. Now, heads up for listeners, today's show deals with some tough topics. There's likely to be discussion of sexual assault, violence, and potential suicide. So we want you to use your best discretion when listening in the future. So many of the officers accused of sexual harassment still work at the department. WPLN's Paige Flager reports the lawsuit provides a glimpse into the culture inside MNPD. Paige, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit more about Citlali Gomez and why she wanted to become a police officer?
Yeah, so Citlali Gomez grew up in Nashville. She's a Nashville native, and she really wanted to see more officers in her community that looked like her. You know, a woman, Latina, speaking Spanish, and she really set out to she wanted to repair the relationship and some of the distrust between police and her community. But it was almost immediately upon joining the department that she realized that was going to be really difficult to do.
What was her time like at MNPD?
So she was 24 when she started at the police academy. Pretty brutal to make it through all the things, the trials and tribulations that you have to go through in order to become an officer. And she kind of realized pretty quickly that MNPD is a boys' club, and the numbers bear that out. She was one of just a handful of female officers in her graduating class, and MNPD's current roster shows that only about 12% of sworn officers, so the people that deal with the community, are women. Male officers started, she noticed, making lewd comments about her looks, about her body. They would text her inappropriately. They would ask her out. One officer asked her to go to a hotel with him. One officer asked her to go on a trip with him. Some officers would send her naked photos, text her naked photos of themselves, and request photos from her in return. So all of these behaviors over the course of her, what ended up being about 6 years with the department, just kind of an onslaught of harassment, not only from fellow officers at her level, but also people in supervisory positions, and also at one point the officer that she was training. So from below her, above her, it was kind of coming from all directions.
So for 6 years, she endured all of this. Did she ever report it inside the department?
Yeah, so this is a tricky topic. I think from what I've heard and from my reporting, it's very clear that deciding whether or not to report these interactions becomes really difficult. Citlali has said that she felt kind of discouraged to make any reports about the sexual harassment, and she worried about the impact that it might have on her day-to-day relationship and her ability to do her job.
If you want people to come to your calls and answer your calls or back you up, then you get to say nothing. So if you want to advance, you don't want to be the person that told you don't want to be that person. And I think that's not right. That's not okay.
And there was this underpinning to Citlali's experience about just being fearful of retaliation. So in one case, she did come forward and say that a male officer was making these inappropriate comments towards her and it was making her feel uncomfortable. That male officer was punished for 1 day for making inappropriate comments to Gomez, but Gomez was given 4 days of punishment for running an errand while on duty, which is kind of something that becomes commonplace among police officers, but it's one of those things where like you can get dinged for it if they decide that they want to go looking for a reason to punish you. And that was what Citlali, that's what her experience, she says, was like.
So how does Citlali's experience, how does this fit into the bigger picture of this issue?
Yeah. So if we rewind a little bit back to 2020, there was kind of this big upheaval here in Nashville where more than 70 police officers came forward with allegations of experiencing sexual harassment and even sexual assault inside MNPD. It peeled back the curtain on this culture that for the most part, had gone unchecked and unnoticed from the outside, and one that officers really worried would spill over into the community. You know, there's this attitude, if that's how they're going to treat their fellow sworn officers, how are they going to treat a civilian on the streets? You'll hear more about this kind of massive moment back in 2020 from Greta McLean later in the hour with Silent No Longer, but her organization helped kind of meet with city leaders to try and come up with some policy recommendations about how to handle sexual harassment claims inside the department. They wanted to see those investigations outsourced in hopes that it would make them, one, faster, and two, more trustworthy.
Well, what has MNPD's response been like to all of this?
Yeah, so MNPD declined to comment for this story. They've said to me that they really encourage their employees to come forward if they have complaints of sexual harassment. During the trial, representatives testified that things like asking people out, flirting, that sort of thing is normal and not against policy in the department. And the officers that were named in Gomez's complaint didn't testify. So there were more than a dozen officers that were named in this complaint, several of which still work with the department. And, it's worth noting that it's quite rare for these cases to go to trial at all. It's more common that we hear about a settlement instead. But in this case, they went to jury trial and the jury decided unanimously in Gomez's favor. They awarded her actually $450,000 in damages, but the statute only allows $300,000 to be paid out.
I have a question for you, but real quick. So Metro Police issued a statement saying that flirting, asking other officers and colleagues out is okay, but sending people nude photos is an extreme form of flirting. Did they come up with a policy on what type of flirting is appropriate?
Yeah, so that was actually something that was discussed during the trial, not necessarily the statement that they sent me. But I mean, I think that that's the tricky part. And that was definitely Metro's argument during this trial was like, there's a gray area here where, and even I listened to some of the interviews that were done between the Office of Professional Accountability and some of the officers involved in this case, where there is this issue of like, well, like, was she flirting back with you, or like, was it well received? And I think the issue with the way that things have been operating, from what it sounds like inside Metro Police, is just the fact that whether or not that those behaviors make someone uncomfortable, and if there is a safe place and the ability to like bring that forward and say, I feel uncomfortable, and know that that's going to be heard and well received. And I think that is really the bigger issue that Citlali's case touches on. Okay,
so judgment was rendered in her favor. What's next for Citlali Gomez?
Yeah, so she's moved on to a new career. She moved into a new house. She doesn't live in the same home that she lived in when she was an officer. It's just too full of painful memories for her. And it's been a really hard transition for Citlali, but she says that her daughter has really been a guiding light.
And then I questioned myself, like, did you do the right thing? Should you just have kept your head, down and then kept going? But then I think about my daughter and I'm like, would I want her to be that way? Would I want her to just be quiet and let these things happen to her and then not find her voice to talk about these things? No, but I also wouldn't want her to go through this because I've definitely been through a lot. But I think she'd be proud. I think she'd be happy. when she grows up and knows and learns about it. I hope that she's proud of me.
Paige Flager is WPLN's criminal justice reporter. You can find the link to her story about Citlali Gomez in this show's episode post at thisisnashville.org. Paige, thanks for kicking us off, and thank you for this reporting. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll meet someone who is suing the police after being arrested and never charged with a crime. You can join the conversation by tweeting us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Colonna, and this is Nashville. Imagine you're arrested. You're charged with one offense, then it's dropped. Then you're charged with another and another. Your life is turned upside down. And you feel that what happened to you was wrong. But this is the police. Where do you go for help? What do you do? Naya Abbey had to ask herself these very questions. In August of 2019, she was pulled over in North Nashville while driving on her way home. She couldn't understand what she had done wrong. And since that August night, she has been trying to find resolution. What is Naya up to now? Well, she joins me now to discuss. Naya, thank you for being here. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
Really appreciate you doing it. So, first, just let me ask you, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm pushing forward and moving through.
Well, good. That's good to hear. Can you take us back to that night 4 years ago when you were arrested?
Yes. Well, me and my son at the time, he was 8. He will be 13 in November. We were actually moving boxes from our home. Two of my friends they graciously let me use, one of my friends let me use their car. The other one let me use their shed for storage, because at the time I didn't really have that much money to, buy things because I was moving abruptly. Me and my son were living in that area where I was arrested. I was living off of Ed Temple Boulevard and Buchanan. And my friend who was letting me use their storage lived off of Hermosa and 21st Avenue North. This was our third time moving boxes to her shed. And when we pulled up for the third time, we noticed a car pulling up behind us. And then they turned on their headlights, their brights. I had my son just stay in the car. Me and him stayed in the car because I didn't know what was going on. It was kind of weird that, this car pulls up and then turns their brights on. So I waited to see if maybe someone would come get out the car, or someone would come from one of the houses and get into the vehicle, but that never transpired. So I ended up just pulling off, and I decided to either go back home or, go around the block just to wait, to see if they'll leave. As we pulled off, they followed us down the block to the stop sign. When we got to the stop sign, I made a right. They made a right. They didn't stop at the stop sign. They just continued through. We get to the second stop sign before the intersection of Jefferson Street and 21st. They follow us through that stop sign. The last stop sign we get to, it's about 400 feet from the intersection of Jefferson Street. We get to the last stop sign. They turn on their blue lights. Now, these officers were in a blue unmarked car, so I didn't know, who it could be. Anyone could put blue lights on their car, So just for me and my son's safety, I decided to go to the intersection. Once at the intersection, I rolled down my windows. I parked and rolled down my windows. My son, he fidgets a lot because he's on the autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told him to be still. He knows the routine. So I told him be still. When I turned back around, there were guns pointed at me and my son. They yelled obscenities and told me to get out the car. I got out the vehicle with my hands up in the air, and I was asking the officers, I don't know if I can name them, but Officer Stuckey, I asked him, why they were pulling me over. And he asked me, did I see him? And I was very confused because I'm like, yeah, I mean, I did see you. That's why I'm parked in the middle of the street, His partner comes from around the passenger side and placed me in handcuffs, and they walked me to the unmarked vehicle. While he has me at the vehicle, Officer Stuckey, who initiated the arrest, started searching my vehicle. Then I noticed him going to the back seat where my son was, and I yelled to him and said, "Don't touch my son." He walked away from the vehicle and got in my face and said, "You're going to jail, and I'm calling CPS to put your son in custody." And that's when I kind of I started crying because my son is nonverbal, and I didn't want that to happen. So I begged him to let me call his father. I couldn't reach his father, so I contacted the owner of the vehicle and my brother to come pick up the vehicle and my son. Once they came and picked up the vehicle, the officers took me down to booking, and as we were driving, they told me that they found a small amount of marijuana in the floor. I knew that they were just trying to get me to say something to incriminate myself, because they read me my Miranda rights and things like that. And I know they'll have to do that in order to arrest you. I denied it, and they took me down to booking. Once at booking, I found out that I was facing charges of evading arrest and reckless endangerment, and that my bond was $10,000.
So what
after 4 hours? Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying, what happened after you were released from police custody? How did that impact your life?
Well, it didn't start until after the preliminary hearing on December 4th of 2019, where my case was in general sessions. They moved it to criminal court, to the grand jury to decide if it should go to criminal court. At that time, since there were 2 open felonies under my name, it was hard for me to get jobs and things like that. I was actually working for Cigna Healthcare at the time, as a contracted employee, and they were trying to move me over to full-time. But they had to start the employment process over, the background and all that good stuff. So when they were in the background, they saw that I had 2 open felonies and they couldn't continue my employment. The apartment that me and my son was going to move into, they ended up denying me because of the open felonies, and I ended up having to send my son to live with his father, and he lives there to this day.
So you lost your job, you lost your potential housing from all this. I wonder, were you able to get and acquire the services of an attorney while you were dealing with all this?
I had, at the beginning, I had a public defender. Then I ended up getting with the help of my brother, I ended up having a lawyer, attorney represent me. I paid Jeffrey Goldtrap to represent me. And for lack of better words, I believe that I was completely failed by him as well. He, at my last hearing on August 24th of 2022, he didn't even show up to the hearing, and it was 2 weeks before my trial. So
What happened next?
Well, I ended up basically, I was homeless for these last few years. I'm still, my housing is still unstable. I have a 3-year work gap going on 4-year work gap on my resume. My son, he's still separated from me 14 days after the preliminary hearing because of the stress and things like that, and me being having to separate from my son. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was with child, and I ended up losing my child. I ended up having a miscarriage because of the stress.
I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. A month before the hearing of August 24th, 2022, I ended up obtaining the 911 recordings, basically debunking everything that the officer said in his testimony on December 4th of 2019. When I got to my hearing on August 24th, 2022, the DA wanted to retire my case at first. And they said that I had to follow a stipulation of 1129, basically saying that I couldn't get into trouble anymore for 11 months and 29 days. And if I, succeed, that they will basically let me get all of those felonies expunged off of my record and things like that. I left the courtroom without signing anything. They didn't really, tell me, there's an appeal process or anything like that. And then I ended up having to find that out on my own. I found out that I can appeal the judge's, I had 14 days to appeal the judge's decision. So I wrote my judge, Jennifer L. Smith, and I told her, this has been lingering over my head for years, and I haven't been in trouble before or, after this situation. So she ended up dismissing the case entirely on September 7th of that year.
So you're currently, from what I understand, you're currently suing MNPD, the city and the state. Have you been able to get representation?
No, I have called about 36 lawyers. I have a list of them in my notebook. I've called about 36 firms, and I've had so many of them tell me, "Oh, the stipulation, the statute of limitation is off of your case," and things like that. So I had to basically buckle down and learn different torts and different laws and stuff myself, so that way I can, represent myself, because I feel like, I need to fight. I don't need to take this laying down with or without a lawyer, and I just had to move forward, even if, worst case scenario. But I'm trusting that, things are going to work out for my good.
Have you heard of anyone else? Do you know of anyone else who's experienced this before?
The person who was arrested by the same officer the same year, Mr. Ralph Ward, and I believe he already has won his settlement. Me and him were arrested the same year by the same officer. He was actually arrested 4 months after me in practically the same area.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about the settlements involving the Metro Nashville Police Department. You can send us your comments at This Is Nashville. Now, my next guest is an attorney who has represented people in their case against MNPD. Kyle Mothershead, thank you very much for being here, and welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you.
Now,
thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you being here. I want to get two questions in. I want to, in a second, I want to hear about your response to what you just heard from Naya, but she just mentioned Ralph Ward, who you represented. He was arrested 2019, same year, particularly almost the same area as Naya. Can you give us a little breakdown of what happened in his case?
Well, Ralph's case, it's a different case. What happened there? He was Ralph was a T-Mobile executive sales manager who was out working on their 5G network, and then he was moonlighting as an Amazon delivery driver because his mom's birthday was coming up, and he was trying to put together a party for her. So So he came back into town, and then he picked up his Amazon deliveries and ran them up to Hendersonville, and then he was headed back home, which is Nolensville. So parallel to all this, the flex team, which I don't think MNPD has these flex teams anymore. They've kind of fallen out of favor, but it's like what's called a proactive policing unit. Kind of go after suspected drug offenders and serve warrants on allegedly dangerous individuals and stuff. So anyway, so the flex team that Stuckey was a part of, they were surveilling this motel in North Nashville. Stuckey was in the North precinct, and so they were trying to find this suspected murderer, a man who was indicted for a homicide. They were trying to serve the warrant on him. And they're basically tracking this motel to try to see if they can snag him. And they thought he would be coming and going from there. So anyway, so they would kind of follow cars, and this team would kind of follow cars coming out of the hotel, and basically look for some kind of a justification to pull them over, like speeding or not using a turn signal, whatever, some little pretext, which is illegal. According to the federal courts, you can use a pretext as long as there was some kind of a traffic violation. So anyway, so one of the cars the team followed, which they talked about as, it's a little vague on their radio chatter, but sounds like they're talking about it as a black Nissan. At least one of the team members referred to it as a black Nissan. It goes out onto I-65 and it ends up on Briley Parkway. Okay, and so then now, sort of parallel stories here. So Ralph Ward coming back down from Hendersonville also ends up on Briley Parkway. He was never on I-65 North, but he ends up on Briley Parkway, a little ways ahead of where the flex team is trying to track this car that they're following out of the motel. So they lose the car, like they try to pull it over. And it wasn't actually Stuckey that tried to pull it over. It was other teammates, and it actually isn't Stuckey that ends up kind of being primarily responsible for what happens next. But he was just there in the arrest, and had his gun on Mr. Ward and everything. But so what happens is, one of the teammates tries to pull this car over, and it just takes off, and it's like moving like very fast. And what they, the other thing, other than that, maybe it was a black Nissan, it had high intensity LEDs, and that was kind of it. Like that's it was the description they had of it.
It was a very specific description for this car. Was what kind of car was Mr. Ward driving?
Well, he was driving a red Lexus, which also had high intensity LEDs. But I don't know if that is necessarily that specific. Black Nissan with high intensity LEDs. They didn't have the plate, even though they were up behind the car. They were, tailing, and they didn't get the plate before trying to pull it over. But anyway, so they lose it, and and it takes off. And then Reynolds was one of the other team members. By policy, they don't try to keep up with it, right? Like it's just gone. And so, but then he's cooking along, and then he just decides, because he sees Ralph's car with the high intensity LEDs, like, oh, that must be the car we just lost. Even though, Mr. Ward is just like tooling along at, 55 miles an hour or whatever on Briley, like doing nothing. And so they just followed him in like a stealth mode, like no blue lights or anything, all the way through town, all the way through Davidson County into Williamson County. He lived in Nolensville, and they just like followed him, tailed him. They got the helicopter out, and never tried to pull him over during any of that. And nobody's disputing this. Like this is just what happened. Like they just, stealth tailed him all the way down there. And then he stopped at a liquor store just to like get a nightcap, for when he gets home after the long day of work. And then they just like came at him in this liquor store and drew down on him and forced him down and took him into custody. And he tried to explain, he's like, what is going on here? Right. And there's video of this that's been, played. And he tried to explain to them, like, you have the wrong person. I was never on I-65 North. This is the wrong person. And then Ralph actually had GPS evidence, because he was the delivery driver, so he would like track his routes. And so he actually, he tried to show them like, hey, look at my phone, look at my GPS unit in my car. Like I can prove to you right here you have the wrong person.
Did they
And
pay
they
attention to that?
No, they just refused to look at it. Like, just refused to look at it. And so they took him into custody and they charged him with felony evading arrest. And then, long story short, so he had Joey Kimbrough representing him criminal defense wise. The officers just didn't end up even showing up to court. They got dismissed failure to prosecute.
Okay, so you heard about Naya's case and that she's planning to represent herself to that. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it would be very hard. It's most lawyers don't really understand how to do this kind of work. And I say that with, respect and humility, but like, it took me years to kind of get, and I'm still learning things as I go. Well, certainly in Ralph Ward's case, I was learning things as I went. It's just like, there's so many ways to lose. Like, there's so many complicated little nooks and crannies, and just the immunity is so difficult. It's such a difficult hurdle. Like the Supreme Court has basically laid down like enormous barriers of protection for the police on these kind of lawsuits, which is basically qualified immunity, meaning that police are, in fact, allowed to violate your constitutional rights as long as it's just not like a super obvious, egregious violation. Like, if it's something that, two officers could maybe disagree about, like, is this over the line or is this not? Then, like, they can violate your rights and have no accountability. And then the other part that's tough is that your rights in this context are not very robust, in the sense that all they need to arrest you or pull you over or arrest you is probable cause, or to file criminal charges against you. All they need is probable cause. Probable cause is considered by the Supreme Court to be, they call it a low bar, and it's less evidence than a preponderance of the evidence. Preponderance of the evidence in legal terms, that means like more likely than not. In other words, if you had scales and 51% more likely than not, that's preponderance, right? And that's like if you're doing a civil case, like a car accident, like personal injury kind of case, got proof things by preponderance of the evidence. The police don't need that much. In other words, someone could probably be innocent, but there's just like some evidence that they might be guilty. That's probable cause. And so that's all the police need to arrest you and charge you with a crime.
And we see
that's all they need.
And we can see the effects of that, hearing about Mr. Ward's case and also getting firsthand experience of how it impacts and can disrupt someone's life, as we just heard earlier from Naya. I only have a couple more minutes left, but Naya, I want to ask you, what do you want for your future?
Well, I want to be reunited back with my son. I haven't seen him physically since December 10th, 2021, because he ended up moving to Alabama with his father. They were living in Nashville, but it's just been really difficult for me to be financially stable, or get that stability that I had once again, So I want to be able to take care of my child and do what's best for him and be a role model for him. And that's another reason why I'm doing this. And also maybe, I can help other people.
That is Naya Abbey. She's currently suing the Metro Nashville Police Department. She was joined by Nashville attorney Kyle Mothershead. I want to thank you both for being with us today. Really appreciate you both being on.
Thank you.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk with a former Metro police officer who runs a nonprofit to help sexual assault survivors and a member of the Community Oversight Board. You can join the conversation by tweeting us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. When someone has their rights violated by the police, they do have the option for litigation. Now, before the break, we heard how difficult that can be, especially if you don't have an attorney who's familiar with the process of suing the police department or the city. But our city does have a community oversight board meant to hold police accountable, and there are people and organizations out there who want to help. I'd like to introduce my next guests. Greta McLean is the founder of Silent No Longer, and it's a nonprofit organization that assists survivors of sexual assault, and is a former detective at MNPD. And Jill Fitchard is a member of the Community Site Board and a former guest of the show. I want to thank you both for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for having me.
Greta, I'd like to learn a little bit more about Silent No Longer. What exactly does the organization do to help people?
Our primary focus, in addition to advocacy, is providing creative expression programs so that victims and survivors can share their story, but in ways that they're comfortable. Not everybody is willing or feel comfortable standing in front of a microphone and talking about what's maybe the worst day of their life. This way they can still process their trauma through painting or drawing, music, poetry. And thus far, it seems to be working. A lot of them seem to have come a long way, and it's a real blessing to see them bloom and become more empowered.
Well, tell me, why did you decide to start the organization?
I decided to start the organization after I was raped in 2017. I did not feel comfortable coming forward for several reasons. One, I felt like as a former police officer, I should have been able to fight my attacker off, even though, it'd been 17 years since I left the department. I still felt like I should have. And from some experiences being a detective, I wasn't sure, honestly, whether they would believe me. I didn't think that it would happen to me, so I didn't know that they would believe that it had happened to me. And I wanted to be able, after further processing it and starting to heal, I wanted to find a way to help others that may be in the same situation that I had been, find a way to process it in a healthy way. And there weren't a whole lot of programs that I could find in Tennessee or even nationally where the primary focus was on trauma-informed therapeutic art. So I figured, why reinvent the wheel? Let's do something that isn't already widely done in the state.
Now, you mentioned something. You said you worked for the police department. It had been some time since you left, but because you worked there, you didn't feel comfortable with coming to them about being assaulted and attacked. Talk to me more about that.
When I was a detective in the adult sex abuse unit, the primary reason why I ended up leaving the department was I was staffing a case with the lieutenant over the unit. And during our conversation, he stopped me in mid-sentence and said, okay, hold on. She said no, but she went into his bedroom and she let him take off her blouse. So she said no, but she was really saying yes, so you just need to close the case. And for me, I was like, this is the head of the sex abuse unit, and that's his mentality. And at that point, after several months of thinking about it, I decided this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what law enforcement should be, in my opinion. So I ended up leaving. And it was because of that experience that I didn't feel comfortable going to Metro and telling them what had happened to me.
Now, I know you're talking right now specifically about the head of the department, but was that a common, let's just say, motif throughout the rest of the unit you were working with?
There were a couple of other people who were, for lack of a better term, insensitive. They would sometimes make comments saying that, well, she's a prostitute, so she couldn't have been raped. She's probably just mad that she didn't get paid. Or I actually heard at one point, well, she lives in the project, she's black, that she's just trying to maybe get money. And it's that, sadly, and I'm not proud of this, I looked over that a little bit more, but it still really bothered me. And that, on top of what the lieutenant said, was just the last straw.
Too much for you. Now, Jill, you're a member of the Community Oversight Board. Tell me this. You're also a human being. How do you respond to what Greta's just shared with us?
Yeah, I mean, when I've heard this story, it's always been pretty startling to me that a police department director, a director of a department would also be a person who is, victimizing people all over again. And so those are the types of things that, as we start talking about misconduct, that continue to come up, throughout conversations, and people that have even made complaints to us about how complainants have been handled or what they witnessed in regard to how individuals who have either been sexually assaulted or who have been sexually harassed, how the police department conducts business with them. And so because of that, Ms. McClain has come to our board meeting, has suggested how we could create policy together in moving forward with helping the police department create a policy that really is specific towards those who work with the police department, who want to file complaints about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and also how they handle victims.
You on the community oversight board, so you work with the police department. Do you feel like their process for finding discipline for an officer who violates one of their policies, do you feel like their process is robust and it actually works?
That's a loaded question. Does it work? I don't know about that. I think that with having an independent agency help deal with discipline issues and misconduct, I think is the way that most departments are leading. And the reason for that is because if a police department, number one, they're policing themselves. Then secondly, the communities in not only in Nashville, but across the state and across the nation, most people are vocalizing that they want independent investigations because of a lack of trust in holding officers accountable in these police departments.
So what type of recommendations has the Community Oversight Board made?
We make discipline. So what we do is we used their grid for discipline, and we would make our recommendations, whether it be for suspension, whether it be for termination. It's based on the violations that were found. So a complainant may come in and say, hey, this officer was discourteous. But the more you dig into it, you realize there were violations of like their Fourth Amendment rights, adherence to policies, it could be multiple things. And then we would make a recommendation for those particular policy violations to be handled. And we would use their discipline grid. And at that point, you determine what the individual misconduct was, and you put the particular punishment next to it, and you send it to the chief of police, because all we ever had the power to do was to make the recommendation. Mm-hmm. And then he makes the final decision on whether or not to utilize the information that we've given him in an independent investigation to assist him in making the right discipline.
Now, we got a tweet in at This Is Nashville from Angus Purdy. It says, quote, "Why does Metro Council insist on rubber stamping the ballooning budget of a department that refuses accountability? They should be ashamed," end quote. Jill, what's your reaction to that?
I just think people are misinformed about what we do. I don't know what they mean by rubber stamping us. I mean, we've done, I don't understand what it means by accountability. I think that anybody can look at us and we don't have anything to hide about accountability. So I just think that there's a lot of misleading and misinformed information floating around regarding the work that we do.
I got a question. I'm going to come back to the board in a second. But Greta, you were an officer for a long time. How did, I'm sure you were aware of discipline being handed down to fellow officers who violated policy. What were your thoughts about that when it happened? Did you feel like it was just? Do you feel like it was robust when it did occur, or was it kind of light?
I think it depended on who the officer was a lot of times. From my experience as an officer and since in advocating for the victims, the MNPD victims, is that's still the case, depending on who you are, who you know. And accountability, I think, is essential, because without accountability, you start losing the community trust. And if the community doesn't trust the police department, then it's less likely that people are going to come forward and give information about, a crime. And that puts all of us in danger if we're allowing somebody to still be on, a violent person to be on the street. And in my opinion, departments should embrace oversight, because if you're doing it right, you have nothing to worry about. The only reason that you should fight it is if you're doing things that shouldn't be happening.
Now, Joe, the last time we had you on the show was about the state's law to change community oversight boards. And in the future, the board will be appointed by the mayor. We have a runoff coming up in a month to determine who's going to be the next leader of the city. What are the implications of how that's going to affect the board's ability to do this job, who the board is constructed of, and their ability to continue on this mission you were just telling us about?
Yeah, I mean, what we proposed when we were reconstituting into this new board that we have to have based on the state law, becoming a community review board opposed to an investigatory body. The mayor just appointed 7 people from our current board, which is what we asked. What we had asked was that the mayor would only have one choice instead of picking all the people, but like have community organizations put people, put their names out because that would still give the community some insight. So I think right now we're good. I don't know what's going to happen in the subsequent years, but we would hope that whoever becomes mayor would continue to honor community's involvement in this oversight process.
What do you see as the future for the Community Oversight Board?
Well, we're working on, creating a review board, aside from having litigation filed, which I still think is something that we need to do, because no matter what, 134,000 people's votes are suppressed at this point. And so I will still be advocating for that we have to get a lawsuit filed, and people should file a lawsuit regarding their right to vote, and it being suppressed. But in order for us to move forward, we had to create something, or we would have nothing come October the 27th. So the council approved us moving forward with the review board. We're trying to work really closely with other agencies across the country that have review boards, and just create the most robust one we can.
Greta, how can people's faith in police department, their ability to enact discipline upon themselves, but also to ensure employees and civilians have their rights respected and not violated by police officers? What can be done? What do you want to see be done?
I want to see accountability and transparency, and I believe that can be done with oversight and also with collaborative investigations. One of the things that I put forth to the Community Oversight Board was a policy where if officers were involved in allegations of sexual assault or domestic violence, that a collaborative board or group would actually investigate it instead of it all being internal, similar to what they do with child sexual and normal abuse. Have somebody from the DA's office, have an advocate from a domestic violence or sexual assault organization, as well as somebody from OPA and somebody either an investigator with the domestic violence unit or the sexual assault unit. Equal representation, but everybody's assuring that either it's not being too aggressive or too partial, or that it's not being swept under the rug. And again, I would think that most police departments would embrace that so that they could show we are doing things the right way. And we want to make sure that the community feels safe. Whether Metro will decide to adopt that, I don't have an answer for that, but I hope that they would, if nothing else, as a show of good faith, that they are willing to address this problem. Because I think it's really important for the people of Nashville to understand that when these lawsuits are being brought justifiably, but when they're being brought forth, the money that's being paid out isn't from the police department. It's from our pocketbooks. It's our tax dollars that could be going to hire more firefighters or EMTs, to upgrading our schools, to affordable housing, things that we genuinely need. But instead, it's having to go towards lawsuits because the department thus far appears to be unwilling to address the issue.
Greta McLean is the founder of Silent No More, a nonprofit organization that assists survivors of sexual assault, and is a former MNPD officer. And Jill Fitchard is the executive director of the Community Oversight Board. Thanks to you both for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of WPLN News and Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Elizabeth Burton. Our senior producer is Steve Harouche. Michaela Elias is our technical director. The masterminds behind our theme music are Laurent and Namir Blade. Special thanks to Jason Lee and Nina Cardona for the help on tech today. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram. Tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.